بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Assalamu alaikum. Emily and Manishat Islam welcomes you to its Saturday morning broadcast, Lessons in Islam, which are primarily for our new brothers and sisters. In these lessons, what we try and do is to cover the basics of Islam and the reasons for the Muslims having been given those instructions by Allah. We've covered the kalima or the testimony of the faith, and we've covered salat, and we've covered zakat. Today we are going to cover Saum or fasting. So let us have a look at what the Holy Quran says about fasting. We look at the verse of the Holy Quran where fasting is made compulsory for Muslims, and then we will discuss that verse of the Holy Quran. Fasting is made compulsory in Al-Baqarah, which is the second chapter of the Holy Quran, and it is made compulsory in verse 183. So let us have a look at that verse of the Holy Quran. It says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu kutiba alaykumus siyam kama kutiba alallazina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. And its English translation is, O you who believe, fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you. As it was prescribed for those before you, so that you may guard against evil. Couple of words that I want to mention here. Number one, as-sayyam, and its root is fad wa mim, and it means to abstain. So we're talking about abstention, refraining from something, stopping doing something. So that means abstention was prescribed from our normal day-to-day things that we do. And what is the purpose? Tattaqun, and its root is wa qaf ya, to safeguard or to protect. Now, the word taqwa comes from this, and many people translate that as so that you might become pious, so that you might become righteous. But the root of the word itself means protection, safeguarding. It's like measures you take to protect your body. You may go into your doctor and say, I'm traveling to country XYZ. What vaccinations do I need? And the doctor will say, well, what you need to do is get the vaccination against, I don't know, typhoid and all this kind of thing, and take these tablets for malaria, etc., etc. So you're protecting yourself against that. You can say, well, that will keep me fit. But the main purpose is protection, guarding your physical health. So, in the same way, by fasting, you're guarding your not just your spiritual health, but also your physical health, both of them. Your physical and spiritual health, you're guarding both of them. And the reason I say physical health is that we know a lot of people in the world, particularly in the West, in those countries which are well off, are obese. And obesity itself leads to many, many problems. It leads to high blood pressure, it leads to diabetes, and it leads to heart problems, etc., etc. So fasting is prescribed for you. It is for so that you abstain from food and relations with your wife for the sake of your physical health and for the sake of your spiritual health. And of course, if you safeguard yourself against these things, then you do become pious. But the meaning of the word is not righteous or pious, as sometimes translated, but to guard, protect yourself, guard against evil. So the interesting thing is, here are some notes, and goes back to the verse of the Holy Quran. It says, fasting is not a new requirement. O you who believe, fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you. So this is an old institution. And this is the thing about Islam. Islam says that it is not a new religion. It's the same guidance that was sent to Abraham and Moses and David and Solomon and Jesus and perhaps Buddha and Krishna, etc. All it's doing is it's bringing all that guidance sent to different people together in one place. So it says that fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those who went before. And in fact, if you to go back to Salat prayer, if you look at it, you find that even the postures of Salat are very similar to some postures you find in older religions. For example, if you read the book of Zoroastrians, you find that wuzu or purification that is mentioned there, it's done in much the same way. Same with prayers. I was in, I forget the name of the place now, high up in the mountains where the Dalai Lama is, and I went to see the morning Buddhist prayer, and I was amazed that although there were slight differences, the postures of people praying were very similar. They would stand, then they would bow, but they won't put their hands on their knees. They will just bow from the waist down. And then they'll go down and put their heads on the ground, although they were lying flat rather than prostrating in the way that Muslims do. But you can see the similarities. So it's the same with fasting. That God says this is nothing new. It's been a requirement of all the people, all the nations before that went. And we know, for example, from the New Testament, that Jesus fasted for 40 days. And during that time of fasting, he had many wonderful spiritual experiences. And many Muslim saints, etc., they adopt this practice as well. The promised Messiah, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib, he adopted fasting as a means of protecting himself from, as the Holy Quran says, evil, but also gaining wonderful spiritual experiences. Hindus also have kind of fasting, but rather than give up everything, they give up certain things. For example, they may give up cooked food. And a wonderful fast which Hindus observe is the fast of silence observed by the wives. I'll let that sink in, where the wives observe a fast of complete silence. But it again goes back to the point about abstaining. You give up something. So as I said, if you look into religions, you find that I forgot to mention Buddha. Buddha fasted as well, although later on it was looked down upon because it was felt that people fasted to show off rather than gain any physical and in particular spiritual benefits. They fast just to show off. And it happens that, for example, when I was very young, I was in school in a Muslim majority country, and every day when kids met at school, they would compete with each other. How many fasts have you kept? I've kept more than you. I'm holier than you. I'm more pious than you. You kept 6 fasts, I've kept 7. I've kept 9, and so on. And that is not the purpose of fasting, to sort of lord yourself over others. The purpose of fasting is to make you humble. And so we come to purpose of fasting, and it is not to make people suffer. It's not to inflict pain on you. You know, in some religions, what you have is that people fast, or they inflict pain on themselves in some other way. They might lash themselves, walk across glass, etc. And by inflicting this pain upon themselves, they think they're pleasing God. God is not pleased if you injure yourself or you hurt yourself. He's not some kind of sadistic creature who glorifies and loads in seeing people suffer. That is not the purpose. The purpose of fasting given here is so that you guard yourself against evil inclinations. So, how do you guard yourself against your evil inclinations? The point is that you've given up eating, you've given up drinking. Now, these are necessities of life. You cannot live without eating or drinking, or not for very long. But you give them up from sunrise to sunset, or just before sunrise to sunset. Why do you do that? You do it because God says so. That's the only reason. God has said, give this up. You give up intimate relations with your wife. Why? Because God has said so. So you give up pleasures of life. You give up necessities of life, and you give up pleasures of life simply because God has asked you. There's no other reason. God said, give it up, so you say, yes, sir. No question, I will do that. Now, if you can give up those things which are necessities of life or pleasures of life upon God's command, because you think it's the right thing to do, then how much more important is it to protect yourself, to forsake those things which Allah actually forbids, such as lying, cheating, being cruel, being dishonest. And the list is a long one and it goes on and on. And it is very strange that people, while they say they're fasting, actually violate other commands of Allah. They're rude to people. They don't do their duty properly. For example, they don't turn up for work on time. And what's the reason? Oh, I'm fasting. Yes. But God has said that you have to abide by your promises. When you got this job, you entered into a contract, you made a promise. You said to your employer, I'll work from 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever to 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock. And the employer promised that in return, the end of the month, you'll get this much money. So, if you're fasting and you don't turn up for work, you're breaking that promise. And elsewhere in the Holy Quran, it clearly says, who are the righteous? Who are the pious? Those who keep their promises. And fasting, that is supposed to make clear to you how important it is to fulfill your promises. You're using that as an excuse to violate another injunction of the Holy Quran. We have become, how shall I say, ritualists, literalists. That we believe in rituals and we believe in literal things. God says, fast. So as long as I go hungry, that is fine. I'm not eating, I'm not drinking, I'm not having relations with my wife. That is okay. It doesn't matter whether I lie or cheat or whatever. So that defeats the object of fasting. All you're doing is, it goes back to this Buddhist idea. What's the point of fasting when all you're doing is doing it for show? You're not actually doing it to actually gain any spiritual benefit. And this is the sad thing. This is the sad thing that, and it is, true that most people do it. And Allah has given certain relief. If you're on a journey, you don't have to fast. If you're ill, you don't have to fast. And people think that by not taking that relief, they are being even holier. They are being even holier. Some women fast even when they're pregnant, and it may harm their baby. Now, how can Allah want to harm a child in the womb? That can't be right. So while we are fasting all the time, we have to think, am I abiding by all the commands of the Holy Quran? Am I fulfilling the spirit of this injunction? And this is one thing that we have in real life. Sometimes people go to court and they say, well, what the government is doing, for example, it may be in accordance with the letter of the law, but is it in the spirit of the law? And they want the spirit of the law observed as well. Because otherwise, you're just doing it for show. There are many office workers who would be rude to the people that they're dealing with. Why? Well, he's fasting and, he was late going to bed because he was saying his Tarawih prayer and he didn't get enough sleep or enough rest, and then he had to get up early in the morning to have his breakfast, etc., etc. Is that the purpose of fasting? That you deny human beings who might be in difficulty? You may be a doctor. You may be going in to operate on someone. Someone's life may depend on what you do. Someone's physical well-being may depend on what you do. Are you fulfilling the purpose of fasting by turning up to operate on a patient and you're half asleep? You may be a lawyer and you have a case being heard in the court. And if you're half asleep and if you're tired and you can't pay attention and your client gets sent to prison, isn't this negligence? Is this what God wants from your fasting? Of course not. The purpose of fasting is to make you a better person. The purpose of fasting is not just to make you proud so that you can go around showing, you know, this Ramadan I fasted for all 30 days. But you then don't add what spiritual benefit you got from it by making sure that you did your duty to humanity. There are two parts of Islam: your duty to Allah and your duty to humanity. And the purpose of the fast is to make you realize that there are people who are less fortunate than you, and make you realize how it feels to be hungry. When you go down and see fruits and other food in the kitchen and you're unable to eat, just think of the person, the hungry person who's walking down the road and he's passing restaurants and KFCs and McDonald's and so on, and he can see people sitting there and eating and laughing, and he hasn't had anything to eat for a day or 2 days. How does he feel? But this feeling of empathy that you're trying to create, not sympathy, this feeling of empathy, you're trying to go through the same experience, is supposed to last for the rest of the year. Not just for that day, not just for that month, for the whole of the year. You're supposed to keep thinking. When you see a hungry person and you feel nothing for him, you're supposed to think, hang on, when I was fasting, how did I feel? When I was fasting, how did I feel? When I couldn't eat and I could see all the food and everything, what did I feel? But at the time of breaking of the fast, I could eat. But maybe he still can't. So let me try and help him. We people just make excuses. Oh, well, why doesn't he go and get a job, or why doesn't he this and why doesn't he that? If that empathy has not been created in you, then you haven't truly fasted. This is the end of our lesson for today. Inshallah, next Saturday we'll cover the last pillar of Islam, and then the week after we'll have a look at the link between each of these. Our next broadcast is tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and it is the call of the Messiah, when we will be going through the second part of what Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan Sahib said about the British. With a prayer that whoever you are, wherever you are, may Allah keep the whole humanity under His protection and free from harm. I take my leave of you. Assalamu alaikum, Khuda Hafiz, and goodbye.